What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the You Might Be Surprised podcast. How's everyone doing? How's everyone going? How's everyone doing? Whatever I like to say. I took a week off, and now I'm feeling a little rusty on the podcasting side of things. I didn't mean to take a week off. A little bit about that in a second, but I hope everyone has had a very happy holidays. I'm recording this on December 24th on Christmas Eve. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you have a great Christmas, and any other holiday that you choose to celebrate, I hope you have a great happy holiday. We're chilling, dude. We are chilling. This podcast is gonna be a little different. I kind of want to talk about something, a little bit about depression and a little bit about where I was at the beginning of 2020 compared to where I am now, and like my mental state and my creative state, and kind of like talk about goals. Some people really like to lean on goals, like what they've accomplished throughout the years. And I kind of have like this whole big grasp of things that I want to talk about. Let's get this out of the way though. First, my socials. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram. It's literally just YMBS_Chris. Tweet at me, say what's up, tell me you came from the podcast. If you just want to follow the podcast, you can follow it on anywhere where there's podcasts available. You can search me up on YouTube. Just search up You Might Be Surprised. Or if you just want to follow me on Instagram, the podcast Instagram is You Might Be Surprised. Okay? The podcast Instagram is You Might Be Surprised. I'm going to lower my chair a little bit. But yeah, the reason why I didn't post a podcast this week was because I had one all recorded. And I had to come to a realization that I kind of want to do like a soft reset on the podcasts. I kind of want to reinvent the wheel on who I am and what I want this podcast to be. I feel like I do this about every like 5 episodes. I'm like, am I doing this correctly? Like, what do I want this to be? And then like the cool thing about a podcast is it grows as you are. And the podcast I recorded just wasn't me. I was trying too hard, and I don't like want to try too hard at all. I just want it to be me and genuine. And if I say some funny stuff, I say some funny stuff. I was trying too hard to be funny. Maybe I'll put out that episode, maybe not. I should go back and listen to it. Actually, I think I formatted the card, so it doesn't even matter. Doesn't even matter. But like I said, this podcast, if you've listened to the past 31 episodes or 30 episodes, I try to be hilarious. This podcast, I'm going to be real, to the point, and because I think that there's a good point to be had here, and I've kind of gone through some shit throughout 2020 that a lot of people just don't see on the outside, even if it's some of my family members. I keep my personal stuff to me. And to me alone. I don't even tell like my parents that much, that stuff, but I wanted to put this out there for people who are also in my shoes, who had a crazy year, or for people who are just lost and don't know what to do with their lives, because I think I can maybe help, and with me putting this out into the world, maybe somebody will see this and help me. Because at the end of the day, like, you start a podcast because you want real conversations with real people. At least that's why I started the podcast. That's why it's called You Might Be Surprised. So let's get into it. I took notes. Like, I have notes ready because I'm also trying to be more prepared for these podcasts, dude. So let's get started. Let's forward back to January 2020, where a podcast wasn't even in my head. January 2020 was a weird time for me. I was going out with this person, and the reason why that's relevant is because I was using that person as a source of happiness, because I didn't realize that I had about 6 years of pent up not anger, more just like pent up emotion that I didn't know I had. And whenever you find some sort of happiness, for me, I grasp onto it, and it's so very hard for me to let go, especially with personal connections. So I was going out with this girl, and I came to the realization after we broke up, that I was dealing with a severe depression that would come on at random times. I guess that's what depression is. It comes and it goes, and you don't really know when it's gonna happen or when it's gonna hit. It can hit you, and some people get depression and then they like can't move for like a week, and like all they want to do is sit there and cry. My depression kind of comes in waves, and it goes back to the center point of not feeling like I'm good enough. And I'm not going to go into the reasons of all that. That's personal stuff. But back in January 2020, I was feeling this, and I didn't know how to reach out for help, and I didn't know what to do. I kind of just thought of it as being a guy, like, oh, this is just something you go through, you'll figure it out. And that's like kind of what I've did like my whole life. I've had the speech impediment for my whole life that a lot of you guys probably haven't even seen or probably haven't even noticed about this podcast. And like making friends was difficult for me, but I figured it out. Learning and doing school was hard for me, so I figured it out. Feeling like I'm not good enough, I just thought it was something that I was just going to have to figure out, and it was going to make me stronger and continue. But I came to the realization that what I was feeling and the way I was feeling wasn't just something that I could figure out. And it's very hard to go out there and make that first step of like, oh, I need to see help, or I need to talk to somebody, because sometimes all it takes is like going and talking to one of your friends, and like they like help and cheer you up, and all of a sudden like you're doing better. But for me, it was like a lifelong, not like a life. I guess it was kind of like it was like a lifelong of emotion that was just pent up. And some of you are probably listening to this like, well, if this is like lifelong and or like the past 6 years, like why weren't you feeling these emotions before? And the truth of it was, or is that I was, but I was in college. And if you don't know, college is where you are constantly in a structured zone where you have deadlines that you have to meet for assignments. And when you're not doing those deadlines, you're out there partying and hanging out with friends. So I was able to shove those emotions down with either alcohol or good times, and kind of just put them at the back burner of like my emotional bank. So what I did when all those were coming out, kind of in the January, February range, was I came to the conclusion that I needed therapy. I needed therapy, and I didn't think that like my depression or like my like these feelings that I have needed any sort of like medical help. It was just more of just like I'm a lost 23-year-old at that time, with all these emotions of weirdness of like putting down like someone who made fun of me because of my speech impediment when I was in like fourth grade, but then like dealing with it, but then those repercussions of that would like hold me back emotionally, or like things like that. So therapy is a touchy subject with some people, because a lot of people don't like therapy in general. They don't like therapy because they think it's just you talking from somebody, and like they're just gonna judge you just like everyone else does. And I was lucky enough. For me, I had the choice between a guy and a girl therapist, and I could not do a guy. I just felt like my problems that I had just wouldn't be justified from a guy, and I didn't like the part of me is like, if I had a guy therapist, the guy was just gonna laugh at me like, bro, come on, suck it up, come on, like really. So that's why I didn't choose a guy. I chose a girl, and I was lucky enough to find a therapist that worked for me. I think that's the hardest part about therapy, is finding somebody that, one, you can kind of trust. Two, you have to learn. It's not just like you go to therapy 3 times and you're good. Like I've been going to therapy. It's gonna be almost a year at the beginning of the new year, and I can already tell a difference between who I was then compared to who I am now. So I found this therapist, and if anyone's struggling with like depression or a mental blockage of where you just need to go out and talk to somebody where it's like a judgment-free zone, I really suggest going to a therapist. It helped me tremendously. And it's kind of like my problems were kind of like a mind state change. So once I digested the problems and figured out what they were, I was able to then recreate them in my head and be like, oh, I can do this, this, and this now compared to what I was. And I'd see these week after week after week that I was going. I wasn't going every week. I was going like every 2 weeks, and now it's like every month. So for the past 3 months. So it's not like a huge thing. But yeah, some people just have like this weird stigmatism around therapy. And if anything that I've said kind of correlates to you, or you think that you should be seeing somebody, I highly suggest it, because it really does help to like just pour out those feelings, and then the therapist be like, well, we can recreate that problem, or we can bring that problem to something that happened to you when you were a kid, and now that you're not that, you can kind of see the problems, and you're like, oh, these are just thoughts that were locked into your head, thoughts that you thought defined you, but they really don't. At least for me, or like if you're going to therapy for like an abusive relationship or something like that, there's workarounds for all of that, but I'm just talking about my experiences. So that was like the January, February, March. Yeah. January. So the January, February, March, era, and then April comes along, right? And I do this. So I've been going to therapy for a month, and then I kind of do this alcohol-free April thing where I kind of just like did not drink at all. Not barely drink it at all to begin with. Normally I'm drinking whiskey on this podcast, but I'm drinking water because I didn't want to get into my feelings so much. But yeah, so where was I? Oh yeah, so the January, February, I kind of touched on this in April. Like the beginning of my podcast was me talking about alcohol-free April, and how I ran a mile every month, every day. And then that's when I kind of started my podcast. Was like, so I had that January, February breakdown. February started going to therapy. March I chilled and was figuring out my life, and then COVID hit. And then April, towards the end of April, is when I started the You Might Be Surprised podcast. And podcasting has been a tremendous help for me in a lot of ways. But that's not what this podcast is about. I want to get this first part out here of like, without me going to therapy and without me trying to figure out who I am as a person, I wouldn't be here talking and creating a podcast, trying to be hilarious and doing all the things I've written down, because I want to transition into goals that I had over 2020, compared to what I actually did, and then goals that I have going forward about this podcast, about my personal life, that we can connect on a whole different level, and you guys can hold me accountable for some of them, because I want to do some cool goals for 2021 for this podcast, dude. All right. So goals I always find hilarious. If you're like me, I've set goals every year for the past 3 years, and they were always crazy goals that I could not grasp, I could not do, or I set them too high and I got discouraged and I didn't end up doing them. And I actually wrote down the goals that I had for 2020. And let me tell you the goals, and then let me tell you what I actually accomplished this year. And you guys can make an assumption of, sometimes it's good to not necessarily look at the goals that you didn't succeed at, but what you actually did. Because if you look at what you actually did throughout the year compared to the goals that you set, chances are you'll see that you actually accomplish more and are taking a bigger step forward than what you actually think. Because for me, like, I'm always like second guessing myself. Like, I always want to continue to move forward. I think that's how you become a better person. Is to constantly take steps in growing. I don't like people who see the world as half full or see a glass half full. I like to, or a half empty compared to half full. I like to think of myself as an inspiring person, always trying to learn, always trying to better myself, to reach for more. And I mean, that's just who I am. But so the goals that I had for 2020. So this kind of goes like back to like where I was like mentally at this point. So the first one was create weekly goals. find a career path that I like more than what I'm in. Express myself more. Push myself at the gym. Find new hobbies. Make money and move out. Because I always make jokes and like, I'm doing this podcast in my mom and dad's basement, dude. But those were my goals. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 goals, and they're pretty like wide range goals, which I think are like really hard to grasp. Now let me actually tell you what I actually did in 2020, and you make the decision on whether or not I did more or less. I believe I did more. So the cool things I did this year, despite everything going on, or the goals, express myself more. This kind of correlates. I was able to be the best man at I had the news that I am the best man at my best friend's wedding, which is a crazy privilege to me because that goes back to like what we first talked about with me not thinking I was good enough. But it's cool to see somebody be like, oh, you're my best man, because one, we're best friends. Two, I see you as a man that wants to represent me. So I thought that was pretty cool. I got into new hobbies such as mountain biking. Shout out to Brendan Schaub and the Thick Boy Bike Club. But the cool thing about that was I was able to, not only was I able to pick up a new skill of mountain biking, a new hobby, I was able to travel around like a couple hours out of my hometown, go to cool places, find new spots to eat. And it also brought me closer to my cousin because I was able to convince him to get a mountain bike, because we used to BMX when we were younger, and it made us closer because we would be like, okay, next week we're gonna go hit up the trails 2 hours away, and we're gonna ride for the whole day, and it brought us closer that way. So not only did I pick up a new skill, I became closer with someone that's a part of my family. I also, one of the cool things that I think, or like a goal that I didn't necessarily write down that I did, was I had a lot of time to think about who I am. This goes back to the whole therapy thing. Think about who I am and like where I want to go in the future. That's why I was trying different things, wanting to do more. But after this, I'll talk about the flip side of that, which can end up being kind of negative. Oh yeah, so then like the having time to think about myself, kind of like that's where like I decided to start my podcast, was because it was something that I've always wanted to do. It was COVID, so we're locked down, didn't have much to do, so I was like, I might as well just learn the skill of podcasting, figure out how to do it, and start doing it, because the times now, and like I was just like, I need to do this because I feel like I just want to be creative, and I love podcasts, and I love the idea of comedy podcasts, because you can be funny and like you can take it anywhere, and it just like escapes you from some sort of reality or helps make your day better. So I started the podcast. Um, and then I was able to find the courage to express my passions on social media. I was never one to post like mirror selfies. I mean, I did sometimes, but like I didn't want to express myself. Like this goes back years ago. Um I've been creating videos and like wanting to do YouTube and content creation for so long. I have videos on a hard drive that's over there of me creating vlogs and stuff when I was in like a sophomore in high school, but never had the courage to actually post them online, because I was afraid of what people were going to think of me in my high school. I was afraid of going into school and me doing something cringy and someone making fun of me at school. So like I was 23 at the time when I decided this, but I was like, I'm going to post my content and post my stuff, and I'm not going to care what people think. And just doing that was such a relief for me, because I was like, oh, I can now do whatever I want, post whatever I want, because I don't care what other people think. And that was a huge milestone for me. And then that led me, so the whole podcast, posting the things that I like to do, and then always like starting a comedy podcast, which put me in the mindset to do stand up, which I ended up doing on my 23rd birthday, which is pretty freaking dope. And I'm still gonna continue probably to do stand up in the future. But also it's just like, that's like, people don't like, that's such an odd thing for somebody to do unless you like know it in your head to do stand up. And it was such a rush for me, and like I prepared for it, I executed it well, in my opinion, for someone who has a speech impediment and has had a fear of public speaking for their whole life. So that was cool. And then with the doing comedy, doing the podcast, I actually, something cool and random that I didn't think was going to happen is I actually met a dude named Joey. We've done a podcast together. You can find that on my channel or on the podcasting app you're listening to this on. Did a podcast with Joey, the host of the Juicebox podcast, and we actually met on a Twitter thread about Chris D'Elia when he got canceled. And now him and I are like, we're bros. Like we text, we tweet at each other, we like each other's posts about podcasting and stuff. It's cool stuff like that you don't think are going to happen throughout the year, and they end up happening every now and then. And then something else that like a personal thing was I was able to spend more time with my family because of everything that was going on in the world, which I count that as a cool thing that I did. So all that stuff compared to the 6 goals I wrote down, which was create weekly goals, find out my passion for work, express myself more, push myself at the gym, find new hobbies, and make money and move out. Out of those, I expressed myself more and I found new hobbies. And I pushed myself at the gym. I gave that like a half a check mark because I did and I didn't at the same time. And so out of all that, I got 2 of my goals for the year. But if you look at what I actually did, I would say I accomplished more than what I actually wrote down. I think goals in hindsight are more of like a rough outline of what you should be trying to do in 2020, or like trying to do in goals are a rough outline. Let me speak this through again. Goals are a rough outline of what you should do throughout the year compared to what you actually do. And I think if people go back and look at their goals and they're like, oh, I didn't accomplish this, I didn't accomplish that, I didn't accomplish this, you're just going to feel terrible, and you're going to be like, oh, I didn't do anything. I didn't, when in reality, you did. You just have to look at it from a different angle. And you're like, well, maybe I didn't move out, but the other 12 things that I accomplished, like starting a podcast, doing stand-up, expressing myself more, meant a little bit more to me than it did moving out for no reason, just to be out on my own, if you know what I mean. Or you take what your goals or what you thought you did and kind of just flip them and be like, oh, I didn't necessarily do that, but I did something better that's going to help me become a better person throughout the year. And then, yeah, so those are the goals that I did, or like the stuff that I did throughout 2020. There's more stuff too, but like those were like the big, like 7 or 8 things that I did. So now I think, this year I kind of, now I want to talk about the goals that I set for myself for 2021, kind of getting like the hindsight thing and kind of going like as a roadmap for the year compared, or like as a rough outline for the year compared to a complete roadmap. So what are my goals for 2021, dude? What are my goals for 2021, dude? Get a girlfriend? Probably won't happen. I'm just kidding. So I kind of broke it down into creative goals, personal goals, and career goals, because this is not yet a career. So I'm just going to talk about the creative goals that kind of go with this podcast. So for this podcast, for You Might Be Surprised, I'm quitting. Starting a new podcast. I'm just kidding. I would never do that. Or would I? Who knows? No, but I kind of want to take this podcast and not do like a hard reset of like who I am in, because I think podcasting for me always needs to be about comedy, but comedy I think I was trying a little bit too hard to be funny. Some of the best podcasts are when you talk about hot topics and talk about hot takes and things like that, and kind of give your own spin on it, and that's what I find hilarious. Like the reason why I lean so hard on Chris D'Elia's podcast compared to whatever you think about him was that he would take the simplest thing and put his own spin on it, and I would find it absolutely hilarious. Granted, he's a comedian and that's what he does, and I'm not a comedian and that's not what I do, but I think what I want to do for this podcast is kind of do the same thing, but I feel like I was trying a little bit too hard to be somebody that I wasn't. I think the best type of comedy for me is when I do my own type of weaving in and out of weird topics and things like that. So I'm going to continue to do the hot take stuff and things like that, kind of like how we've normally been doing the podcast, but I want to make it better, and I wanted to prepare more. I'm actually going to buy an iPad, and you're like, wow, well, how does an iPad prepare you for stuff? Because I like the idea of being able to pull up an article on the left-hand side of the screen, and then get the Apple Pencil and take notes on it, and then take things and kind of talk about that too, and then I can use that as like a prompt, and hopefully that would make the podcast better. So doing that, so just better podcasting, kind of figuring out where I am with this and how I can be more better at this, because in reality, like, this is just like a crazy cool hobby that I'm doing, but I would love to get really good at it, and I'd love to start making a little bit of money from it, because I mean, it would just be cool that where I can just focus on this and have this as my job. And then one episode every week, so 52 episodes. And I also want to, one episode every week minimum. And I also want to have more guests on the podcast. The best podcasts I've had this year are the 2 guests that I have. Shout out to you guys, Joey and Tenacity. And those were 2 separate, like, completely weird podcasts. One was a comedy one where we just shot the shit, and the other one was about competitive gaming. two things that that I like to talk about. But I think that's the cool thing about podcasting is where I was putting myself in a box. I was like, well, I have to do this, this, and this, and if I'm not that, then it's not like a You Might Be Surprised podcast. When in reality, the show's called You Might Be Surprised, so you might be surprised what actually I talk about or what actually happens. That's the cool part about a podcast is it grows as you and it grows like that. I also am going to start a second channel. I touched on it, I think, in the podcast before. I was like, oh, links in the description. It's not yet done yet. But what I want to do with that, I want to do more vlogs, and I want to do more like how-to videos on podcasting and things like that. Think of like Peter McKinnon times Max Tuning. If you don't know who those two are, search them up. That's like my goal. So not only am I going to be creating more podcasts, I'm going to create some more videos on a second channel that will be linked below whenever I have it. First video will be dropping the first week of January, so that's coming soon. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on me, so I need to become more organized and better time managed. Because in reality, creating a podcast and doing that type of stuff, though it takes time, it takes a different type of time compared to working 9 hours a day, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that goes to be more clean. So like that's like my creative goals. I'll touch on my personal goals, being more clean and organized, going to the gym more, time management, and I have learned / read more because I just feel like I need to continue to learn and read new things, whether if it's articles, books. I have at least 5 books. I think I can do a little bit more than that. And then I have some other goals on here too, but that's just what I wanted to touch on for this podcast. I think where was I going with this? I think this is a different type of podcast, but I wanted to get that out there because I think depression in 2020 was at an all-time high. And I just want to let you know if you are dealing with some sort of depression that there is help for it, and reach out to your loved ones, as scary as it might be. And you're probably like, oh, I don't know what they're going to say. Are they going to care? They are going to care. Everyone has your best interest in mind. And also I challenge everyone to step out of their comfort zone in 2021. I stepped out of my comfort zone a lot in 2020. But I plan on continue to doing that and to bettering myself, because you only grow as a person when you're in uncomfortable situations. Last week, I tweeted out some questions. I was like, tweet me questions. And Joey Juice, the host of the Juice Box podcast, shout out to you, asked me, what's the most important lesson you've learned this year? And I put some thought into this because there's a couple things I could say. I could be all sappy and be like, oh, dude, well, if you just try really hard and continue to motivate yourself and learn that you can start a podcast and make your dreams come true. Not going to do that. But what I am going to say is the biggest lesson I've learned in 2020 is that you are the only person who can change where you're at in life. Okay? If you want to start a podcast, start a damn podcast. If you want to get ripped and jacked, go to the gym. If you want to make millions of dollars selling Tupperware door to door, fucking do it. The biggest takeaway from 2020 is that no matter how hard times are and no matter how rough life can get, as hard as it can be to wrap your head around, you are the only person that can change it. And the biggest lesson I can take away and to tell you is to go out there and get it. Go out there and get the money. Go out there, get the experience. Go out there, do whatever you think you have to do, because it's not going to come to you. Nothing's going to come to you. You have to go and get it. That's my biggest takeaway. And if you continue to do that every year, you will gross a lots amount of money, and then you will be really happy, because I've never seen anyone depressed on a jet ski. I don't know why I'm doing this voice, but I am. But for real though, just put your best foot forward and go and get it, dude. That's the biggest takeaway from 2020. And that's where I'm going to end this podcast. A little bit of a different podcast, you know? I'm not always going to be cracking jokes and stuff, but I don't even want to say normal podcasts are going to return, but a new episode every week, every Monday morning at 6 a.m. Central. Can't wait to take you guys with me throughout my life for this next year. Plan on doing some crazy funny stuff with the podcast. I want to do a podcast in a car because it's not that hard. I just think it'd be something fun to do, or like do podcasts. Like, I want to travel with this podcast. I would love to have someone that's like, hey dude, if you fly out to California, we can do a podcast together. And I'd be like, bet, set, put on my mask, let me hop in a car, get on a plane, and we can do a podcast. Like, there's so much potential that you can do. Like I said, the biggest takeaway is you have to go out there and get it and make it happen. But yeah, follow my socials, YMBS_Chris on Twitter and Instagram. Follow the podcast on all social medias and platforms where you listen to podcasts. It's just, you might be surprised. And I'm going to end this podcast like I always do. I've been Chris. You've been beautiful. Try something new. You might be surprised what happens. Peace, guys. Oh, I need to do the thumbnail. The biggest takeaway. Let's get it.